ठीक है तो this will be okay, let me just give my audience intro. Guys, we've been talking for a few minutes, so this is much more casual than the usual. This is our 75th episode. If you're joining after watching episode 74, half my face is gone. I got into a fight with a lawnmower. This episode is going to be about climate change. Our third, we have returning guests, Rafay and Davar. One thing we need to clarify is despite our best efforts, we have no women on this episode because one, it has prior commitments, the other is on the field in Swat, so वहाँ internet का मसला चल रहा है, and the third, उनके घर पे Zoom ही नहीं चल रहा. किस्मत ने उनको बचा के रखा हुआ है. And
नहीं, but climate casualty कराची से zoom in करना था वहाँ.
Yeah, she's in Karachi. Yeah. So, which is a good indication because this episode is also about Karachi. It's not really about climate change like the past two have been, but मैंने सोचा कि मौका अच्छा है, कराची डूब गया, तो let's capitalize on the suffering of others और हम जरा बात कर लें ताकि आप लोगों को पता चले.
Two non-Karachi people speak about it.
Yes, everyone from Karachi loves it when people who aren't from Karachi tell them exactly what's wrong with the city. So, yeah. So Rafay and David, thank you very much for coming. Since we talked several months ago, I think पिछली हमारी बात थी जब लाहौर में crazy smog आई थी last year, not on video. That's when we didn't do video. How have you guys been? What's happened in your lives? Either can.
We've been in quarantine and lockdown.
Of course.
Following SOPs, not going anywhere else.
Yeah.
Like everyone else is.
I haven't left this room in 4 months. This is it.
Good. And as we were mentioning, Rafi, you're doing excellent in lockdown. Better than normal halat.
Yes.
A lot of people are thriving in the lockdowns, but you've been safe, you've been healthy all this while. Sab khairiyat hai.
MashaAllah, we're very lucky, very, very lucky to be able to say so.
Also, probably you've been privileged enough कि हम ख्याल भी रख सकते हैं because not everyone.
Yeah.
ठीक है जी, so let's begin on our exciting and happy topic. These two have been very insistent in telling me that they are fun people. Yeah, and मैं हमेशा उनको depressing topic पे बुला लेता हूँ. So please follow them on their social medias because they're very fun people outside of the TPR circle. But their knowledge and experience is in a very depressing, well, hopefully it gets better at some point, but फिलहाल काफी depressing subject matter, which is climate change. तो मैंने सोचा कि कराची एक बार फिर in our, I think now 10-year tradition डूब गया क्योंकि बारिशें हो रही हैं and things are getting worse year by year. तो हम जरा उस पे topic discuss कर लें. Part of the inspiration was Davar had like 48 tweets about the issue.
I wasn't keeping count.
Yeah. And उसमें बहुत सारी बातें थी about like why this is happening, why it should have been planned for. So let's just do a quick rundown of the stats. If you aren't somehow aware, I believe this was towards the end of August, so about पिछले weekend की बात है, where Karachi had an insane amount of rainfall. And the figures I've gotten from Dawn News and Sama TV, etc., they're saying that in 12 hours, there was 230 millimeters of rain. And overall, August, maybe because this isn't the first time it rained, it's been close to 500 millimeters over the whole month, which, as Bilawal Bhutto reminded us, was the highest in 90 years. So, इसके अलावा there have been crazy power outages. Some areas, people we know, Shariar Pobalzai, prominent K Electric Dushman on Twitter, he was without power for like 55 hours. Some people are saying 70, 24 hours. So kafi common tha. At least 50 people have died. over 200 killed nationwide, but Karachi में 50. And this 200 nationwide is in 2020 overall. Some of the worst hit areas are Defense Clifton, Tower, Orangi, Suchani Town, Naya, Nazimabad, and Old City areas. So the Old City areas are the ones that are closer to the south of the city. That matters for a discussion a bit later. Naya Nazimabad is not as south, but it's also one of the prominently affected areas. Had we gotten Mahim on, unka internet Karachi mein is not cooperating, we would have had a bit more insight into that because she's been looking into it. So, Davar, I think I'll hand off to you. I'm the least knowledgeable over here, but I think a good place to start would be facts and figures to hai hi, but why would we say, why does this keep happening in Karachi in like the simplest way forward? How would you explain why this keeps happening to Karachi?
अच्छा, first again disclaimer, मेरा Twitter handle तो लाहौर वाला, तो लोग समझते हैं मैं सिर्फ लाहौर ही बैठा होता हूँ. I work from Karachi, Lahore,
Oh, one
Islamabad as
second.
well.
Mahim might be joining actually. Sudden
अच्छा,
entry. Let's hope this works. हाँ जी, but लेकिन आप continue करें.
हाँ, so starting off के rainfall की बार बार जो बात हो रही है ना, and last year भी it was pretty bad. Last year I remember 14th August था और साथ बकरा ईद coincide कर रहा था. So on 14th August you had blood in the streets because कुर्बानी हुई थी और साथ में बारिश हो गई थी. So you had all these areas in Garden and Clifton where streets had blood for 3-4 days.
Yeah.
And again वही उसका storm water drains choke थे, कुछ हो नहीं सका. We had the same cycle कि NDM में जाएगा, कचरा हटाएगा, खत्म हो जाएगा. Again this year भी वो cycle चल रहा था, लेकिन the amount of rainfall that happened, even they were surprised कि अब हम भी कुछ नहीं कर सकते.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, Karachi में this has been consistent, but consistently it's getting worse. I remember I've heard a lot of Karachiites speak about it that this isn't the first time इतनी बुरी बारिश हुई है, और इसी तरह these cycles repeat every 5 to 10 years, and in climate terms इसे हम El Nina या El Nino effect कहते हैं. We have
Yeah.
global southern patterns which coincide at a particular moment और वो इतना बुरा होता है. लेकिन at the same time rainfall का वो 5-10 year pattern चल रहा है, but the rainfall is getting worse and worse. Each year we have intense amounts of rainfall happening within 2-3 hours, and over the course of 12 hours it gets so worse that you can't even have rescue
Yeah.
services coming in to clean up, to rescue people. So Karachi ka, the thing about Karachi is it's so much bad over there is because the water simply has nowhere to go. When जब भी हम लाहौर का comparison करते हैं, that's simply एक तो intellectual dishonesty है. लाहौर कराची का comparison कर नहीं सकते किसी वजह से भी. Size का मसला है, population different है, infrastructure completely different है.
और
और उसी वजह से
geographical positioning भी
जियोग्राफिकल
बिल्कुल फर्क है.
पोजीशनिंग बहुत डिफरेंट है.
Yeah.
उसके अलावा jurisdictional issues जो rescue services के हैं वो भी उस तरह नहीं है. Mahim just shared yesterday her brilliant piece on how the cantonments and KMC and Sindh government clash at various places. When you talk about Lahore, Lahore में ये होता है कि एक cantonment है, वो इकट्ठा एक contiguous zone के अंदर है, और बाकी फिर बाकी सारा शहर है. कराची के अंदर एक कंटोनमेंट यहाँ पे, एक यहाँ पे, एक यहाँ पे, एक यहाँ पे, उसमें वो आपस में जब खड़ा पड़ता है, you cannot do anything about it.
Yeah.
So कराची का in a sense it's so much worse is because एक तो naturally you have climate working against the whole geography of the place. Then you have man-made. This is also a man-made disaster in a way that jurisdictional legal issues as well as how the city infrastructure has been built over the years, consistently ignoring warnings, consistently not going through environmental assessments, consistently ignoring कि यहाँ का climate resilience models जो हैं वो हम नहीं implement कर रहे. Climate policy तक approve नहीं हुई. Sindh Punjab both have a climate policy draft but they haven't approved it, and 2-3 years हो गए हैं इसको पड़े हुए वहाँ पे. अब इन policy में अगर ये approve हो जाए, so मजबूरी पड़ जाएगी city authorities की कि हर building construction EIA के अंदर you'll have to bring in climate resilience. Public कहेगी इसमें क्यों नहीं है. So एक तो multiple things coincided last year and this year. And because we ignored it last year as well, हमने कहा चलो सर्दियां आ गई, बारिशें खत्म हो गई, अब अगले 8 महीने दोबारा बारिशें नहीं होनी, तो we just backed off and कुछ नहीं हुआ. उसी तरह ये दोबारा मौका आ गया. अभी भी काफी हद तक मैं as a person who's observing all of this, I think next year in case rainfall दोबारा होती है, there's chances कि दोबारा this entire cycle will repeat.
Yeah.
Because rainfall intense hoti jani hai.
Hmm.
Maybe next year itni intense now, maybe reduce a little bit, but you'll have similar episodes again and again. क्योंकि जो changes आने चाहिए city के अंदर, we still don't have any discussions about it.
Yeah.
बाकी अब someone who is living in Karachi like Mahim can explore and explain कि it's not just about climate, as I said, कि infrastructural issues and jurisdictional issues. That is something debate that again and again comes up.
Hmm.
And at that point, I would say कि if Mahim's joined us, she can probably explain it better.
Mahim, are you here? Is your audio working? Acha, just some background for people. If I haven't edited all of this out, we're recording on Zoom for the first time. We tested it out kal parson with the boys. Zoom ki video audio is less complicated for me to work with than Skype. So abhi hum Zoom pe aaye hain. But Pakistan with Zoom apparently in some areas, in some connections, is not cooperating. Hence the awkwardness. But Chalin, just to pick up from where Davar left off, I think it'd be worth talking about the trend. So I was looking at there's this some Twitter account by the name of Third Pole, and he had a graph. I'll put that graph in now. It was showing the amount of rainfall in Karachi over the years, and it's like 2003 or 2007, 6, 7 mein there was heavy rainfall. Baki 2001, 2, 4, 8 इसमें इतना नहीं था. But pretty much 2009 से लेके 2020 तक बीच में एक 3-4 year period आया 14 से 17 जहां बारिश कम थी. 18 में भी चलो, but 9, 10, 11, 12, 17 chalo, 19 and 20, it's all been like heavy. So before we talk about why all this rain ends up in Karachi and doesn't leave and floods the whole city, which is the main thing, we're confident in saying that this is climate change, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Do remember just a couple of months ago, Karachi was out of water.
Yeah, ironically, ये भी तो होता है. हाँ.
And if you look at it, just this year in Pakistan, we've had locusts. There was a national emergency declared because there was a biblical plague of locusts from the Horn of Africa through Iran, Pakistan, and into India.
Yeah.
And that breeding of locusts is associated with wet winter weather because locusts can't breed in the dry season, which is usually the winter season.
Okay.
But the last 3 years have had unseasonal wet winter weather, which has allowed locust populations to breed again and again and reach these plague-like proportions. And it is just as connectable to climate change, these locusts, than the forest fires in Australia and what we have in California right now. It has to do with temperature increase.
Siberia as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Siberia, there was forest fires there for the first time in recorded history.
Yeah.
And speaking of recorded history, whilst it is said that the 8 or 9 inches of rain Karachi received in 24 hours is a once in a 90-year experience, that's when records started about 90 or 100 years ago. Looking at the last 20 years, you'll see the majority of precipitation events have taken place in the last 10 or 15. That's where the grouping is taking place. So the evidence is very clear that unexpected and unprecedented changes in routine weather patterns are besetting us. And we've got the locusts. And do remember this April and the April before, there were unseasonal rains in Punjab, which affected wheat output.
Yes.
And although last year we had this scandal with wheat exports and imports, there was a wheat shortage this year that was in some incidences exacerbated by climate change. And if we go up north right now, it's not just Karachi that's flooding because of these unseasonal monsoon showers, but we've got vast parts of Swat, we've got Bahrain, we've got Kalam, other areas that are subjected to, Chakwal in Punjab is subjected to flooding. Vast areas in Sindh are subjected to flooding and are expected to be flooding. There's a flood warning at Sakhar Barrage right now, as a matter of fact. Yeah. So we are seeing climate change. There is, is this climate? No, this is it. This is what it looks like. And to put this into context, whether it's going to get worse or not, the limits that we talk about internationally, 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees, the Paris Agreement, so on and so forth, you have to put them into context. It's 1.5 degrees of warming was seeking to limit as compared to pre-industrial levels by the end of this century. That's the target of the Paris Agreement. But right now in 2020, we're at 1.1, 1.2 degrees of temperature increase, and we've locked in 1.5 degrees of increase right now, and are most likely going to reach 3 degrees of temperature increase by mid-century. So we're going to see much worse going forward. And just to wind this up, people tend to think that these 1.52 degrees are somehow limits, like speed limits, that if you go beyond them, you get into trouble. But we have to understand that these limits aren't like that. They are the politically acceptable amount of harm the international community is willing to bear. And to put that into context, the difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees of warming will be greenhouse gas emissions that will probably cost the lives of upwards of 150 million people in mostly Asian and African cities by the end of this century. And that's more than World War I and World War II casualties put together and multiplied by 4. And that's just 0.5 degree of warming. And we've locked that in.
And Vobi, there's so many spiraling effects that this can have, because we don't really understand how everything in nature works.
150 million people was the political decision made between reducing from 2 degrees to 1.5 degrees. That's an insane political cost. People don't understand that this is how it works. There's no safe amount of global warming. Oceans are acidifying, coral reefs are dying, the Arctic is burning, we're seeing methane emissions out of the tundra. So we're in dangerous territory. There's been more ice melt in the Arctic glaciers this year than ever recorded before. And we're on track on some of the worst case scenarios that the UN is predicting when it comes to ice loss.
And also I was reading, obviously this always turns into a doomsday discussion, but abhi coronavirus duniya mein ghoom raha hai. Pakistan mein to, as we were talking, we've ignored it into submission. But there's millions of years of old bacteria locked into the Arctic permafrost, where if the frost goes, now that bacteria is out. We don't know what that is. No one's been exposed to it, so there's no immunity, medicine, vaccine for that. Plus,
it's a zombie movie. It's a zombie movie.
I think one of the biggest problems when the climate change discussion first came out was that everything seemed to be too far out into the future for people to take seriously. And ye 1.5 degree or 3 degree wali baat, like you said, the speed limit. We can see you, Mahim. We can't hear you.
Hi about this.
Yes.
Hi, Mahim.
Computer. Hello, everybody. Yes. Hi.
Now your audio is working, but your video is okay. It's fine.
Video is there.
It's fine. Yeah. How about? Could you wave your hand just so that we know? Yes, she's waving both hands. We have video, audio in sync.
I'm sorry about that. Yes.
That's all right. Internet in Pakistan, and especially in Karachi, can be fickle. So,
I'm in a newsroom. I should have good internet.
So, baat ye ho rahi thi ki, like you mentioned, Rafay, the speed limit wali baat. Everyone was like, 1.5 degree hone mein, there's like a century, ya 3 degree hone. But we're at what, 1.12, you said. And पिछले 10 सालों से it's like an annual flood festival, as I've started calling it, in Karachi. And there have been so many other effects all around. So
flood festival in Karachi, and here, look, I'm not from Karachi, and I know I'm going to get some shit for this. But the loudest protests we've heard have been from the richest, most privileged people.
Yep.
Right? And the truth is that they're the most resilient we have in Pakistan, which isn't saying much because Pakistan's a poor country. But know this, that when a flood destroys a village and knocks out a school and hopefully nothing else, a generation of children go without education.
Yeah.
Right? 5 days without, diesel generators is nothing compared to the damage that does.
Yeah.
And, really, there are people in Pakistan suffering right now today because of the climate crisis.
Yeah. All the discussion on Twitter was, 98% of it was sort of focused on Karachi. But that's not because Karachi was the only place shit was happening. Several tweets came out later showing areas deeper in Sindh where entire livelihoods had been just washed away. Karachi mein to pani khada hai, acha ja nahi raha ye wo. But there were houses that just didn't exist anymore. I saw videos of like kids under a charpai ke upar plastic dala hua tha ki upar se barish na aaye, niche keechad hai, but they can't do anything about it. That's all they have. Abhi Swat mein, like we mentioned, where another of our hopeful guests who couldn't make it, obviously, because she's in Swat. She's there, and udhar bhi, like, Swat's not like a city. It's a bit more developed than like a village, perhaps, but the rivers and waters there are just like, things are, being torn down as we speak. Hopefully, it doesn't get that bad, but it's all over. We're talking about Karachi just because news was focused there, but please, aap ye na sochein ke this will not get to you. Um, Mahim, thank you very much for coming. I think it's good to have someone from Karachi. Technically, to मैं भी from Karachi हूँ, but I haven't been in Karachi for 10 years. तो मैं भी जब बातें करता हूँ तो वो आता है कि bro, more remittances, less opinions, because I don't live in Pakistan. But जरा आप बताएं, please, how, now we've talked about why the rain is increasing, climate change, etc. We've talked about the 10-year trend. Why is Karachi not able to deal with this at any level in terms of, flooding and power outages and just rivers of waters and swimming pools and underpasses? Uh, why is our ability to cope with this seemingly getting worse year after year?
So if you're talking about DHA, what I found out was that when it expanded, they never actually put down a stormwater drainage system. They have sewer lines. And if you go to DHA phase 8, all they do is plotting and they'll put a road down.
Yes.
So if that's DHA.
So when नीचे कुछ नहीं है.
No, there's nothing.
Achha.
And if you look at Naya Nazimabad, which was, I was just tweeting a little while ago that it was designed by RCOP, Yavar Janani and Mehboob Asdar. The reporters who've been there on the ground, they have been looking at its terrain, the topography that you guys were talking about. It's by a ridge, so the runoff from the hill sort of torrent came. It's shaped like a bowl. Some of the blocks A, B, C were particularly vulnerable. And the Kachi Abadi people, who we have an intern here, Asim from IBA, he went there and spoke to people. And they said that there is a nala that runs through, and Naya Nazimabad essentially kind of blocked it. If I were at my computer, I would have shared the satellite imagery, because they had Mangupir Lake, and Saqib Ijaz, who is an environmentalist, he has got some fantastic before and after satellite imagery where they messed with the ecology. Mm-hmm. There was Mangupir Lake. It had 40 species of birds, according to him. And they sort of just built over it. When you talk about whole messing with an ecology. So I asked Arif Hassan the other day, but cities are built on terrain that is conquered or captured by humans, and they have to build on it. So he said, yes, that's fine, but the first thing you have to study is where the water is coming from. So coming back to your question, the water board has not had good people running it for a long time with proper engineers. The good engineers who I've talked to over the years who actually do know something, Javed Shamim, for example, he was in the reform unit and he wanted to fix things. Those babas have started retiring, or they have started to leave because they can't deal with the corruption. So the water board doesn't have the money to give drainage to the rest of the city, the non-cantonment areas. And there's been so much construction in the built environment that there's paving and concrete that messes with it at that level as well, because the builders mafia is extremely ascendant in power. Thanks to the Prime Minister's scheme, we see SEPA rushing through a lot of construction right now because of the December 2020 deadline for the no questions asked construction.
So I should have done this at the beginning, but you said that you spoke to these people and this and that, and I think it would be good to give a bit of an introduction about why you are speaking to these people and what your job is, so that people have an understanding that Mahim's not a person who's just calling, "Haan ji, water board wale, aap kya kar rahe hain?"
Okay.
Yeah, I should have asked before. Yeah.
So I assume everybody knows me. So I'm a journalist and I work at Sama Digital as its editor, Sama TV, the online presence. And for the last 15 to 20 years, I've been in city newsrooms. So Karachi city editor, that's the position I've held at the Daily Times and at the Express Tribune. And at the Daily Times, we did a lot of very interesting reporting. This is Mustafa Kamal's time, end of Nematullah Khan, the Jamaat-e-Islami mayor, Nazim's time. So I saw all of the Musharraf local government, and we reported on a lot of that. And we went through Mustafa Kamal building all the flyovers. I've done a lot of long-form journalism because I'm crazy. So I spent 3 months on a story because there's a certain line of inquiry or question develops in my mind. So that happened at the Daily Times, and at the Tribune, we did a lot more mapping. So I created the crime map for the city, blah, blah, blah. So very fond of mapping, very fond of data. But now at digital, we're finally getting the tools, and, we know what we want to go after. So, and for the first time, I was amazed that Muiz Jafri, the kind of interview he cracked open the DHA and cantonment laws, that is something I haven't been able to do for 20 years because for cantonment, you couldn't do anything. You couldn't ask them a question. So it's a very long, slow process, and that's, they kind of make fun of me in the newsroom because all my stories have to have maps. So I'm like a bit of a map fiend. So that's what I do. So I've been looking at water, road networks, sewage, land. I don't particularly care about the environment. I'm very sorry about that. I care about the built environment because
it would appear not many people do care about the environment. Just tana duniya chal rahi hai.
I mean, yeah, like, I love the bird species, but, I actually don't really care.
So you were mentioning the water board.
Okay, so the water board, right. So
what would they do? What is their job supposed to be in this?
So the water board, the problem with it is, and the Japanese did a very big study on water in Karachi, which is available on the internet and anyone can read it.
Yep.
I'll provide it. They talked about, well, what is the problem with the water board? And the main problem is it can't pay for itself. That's one problem, that their tariff and pricing, and Rafay knows all about that stuff. That's a very sort of messed up situation with the water board, and has been for a long time. So they can't pay their salaries, they can't pay for any new infrastructure, so they have to farm it out, which we see in the expansion of the water supply story, which is the K4 story, which I also kind of looked into recently. They need to increase the water supply to Karachi because we don't have enough sort of water supply for the population that's growing.
But also to sort of bring it into context, how does the water board fit into the Karachi rain flooding situation?
Well, there's also a governance issue, which is what is KMC and the water board responsible for, which is keeping the nalas clean. And there's been a lot of talk about keeping the nalas clean. Now that is connected to a lot of construction on the nalas, the narrowing of the nalas. We have some excellent drone footage, but it's also Karachi. The people of Karachi are dirty. They just, I would really like cuss right now. I don't know if this is a PG.
Oh yeah, you have only your own image to worry about. Hamari koi haisiyat nahi hai.
Look at these people, they just throw all this garbage. Where do they think it's going to go? And so there's a lot of apathy from the bottom to the top. So you're chucking all your garbage. You don't care what's happening outside your own gate. You think the DHA folks, they didn't know that there's no drain outside their gate for all these years? Their streets didn't flood. This has been happening year on year.
Yeah.
So the garbage, we don't have a good garbage collection mechanism, garbage sorting, recycling, blah, blah, blah. So all of these factors combine, and the nalas are one thing, but they're also the nalas and the ancient infrastructure in the old city from the old water board pipes and things, they're overwhelmed. The population has also grown. So it's a combination of things, but the water board was never able to get its act together, and it never had the brain power also. So it outsources a lot of things to consultants, and these consultants, they make a mess of it when they go in, as we see with K4.
So it's Rafay, I feel like you look like you want to say something.
No, Maim is not just a journalist. Didn't just cover the city beat, she also covered the crime beat. So someone who's literally lived in Karachi and seen it, is one of the finest city reporters ever. Work on the KWSB, the interactive map stuff, Maim is spectacular. So I'm agreeing with most of it. But I've got to sympathize. I've worked with public utilities here in Lahore, and I understand that. I mean, working for a city of 10 million in Lahore is difficult enough. Karachi is 20 million people. There is no objective way you can run a city that big. And it becomes more complicated because we are a developing country. It becomes more complicated because climate change is a threat multiplier and all the little weaknesses in the system get exacerbated. But and this is mine was talking about people throwing their waste outside their house. I agree. It's an awareness issue. But hey, where does Karachi throw its waste? You guys don't even have a landfill. It doesn't really matter where you throw your waste because it's going to get collected and thrown somewhere just at the peri-urban area where no one gives a damn.
Yeah.
Or long enough until somebody does.
Yeah.
Right? But here's the thing, in Lahore, for example, there's about 6,000 tons of waste that's produced a day. It's twice that in Karachi. Maar thad ke Shahbaz Sharif, agar achhi cheez ki hai, he got some land in 2008 for a landfill. There was already a landfill in Lahore, but it was an unsanitary landfill. And it was, God's own battle to get people to understand that, landfill banne do, it's far away from the city, whatnot. But if you take all the other urban centers in Lahore, Pindi, Multan, Faisalabad, Sargodha, Sahiwal, Sialkot, what have you, and you put them all together, I bet you they won't produce more than 3,000 tons aggregate. Half that of the city of Lahore. So what I'm trying to say is that, when you look at the challenges of Karachi, if you live in a bubble like I do, and certainly the people in Cantonment Clifton do as well, if you live in a bubble, you tend to equate your problems with everyone else's. But the fact is, running Karachi is infinitely more difficult than running a place like Sialkot, which only produces 300 tons of waste a day, for which I need, 15 or 20 trucks and 500 guys, and I'll be able to clean it up. It's not a big deal. It just requires better management.
Defense or Clifton ka baar isliye bhi zikr ho raha hai because, again, if you're not aware, there was a very public protest, demonstration, argument situation in defense. And again, we're a very Twitter-heavy podcast, and a lot of the noise on Twitter was either defense ke people or people who aren't in defense but want to be in defense or have thought about moving to defense being like, this area is so expensive, #posh, #blessed, magar yahan inke yahan pani khada hua hai, or everything's flooded and Bukhari commercial 70 ghante se wahan bijli nahi hai, or logon ke paas, literally people we know, Rizwan, his wife's mom and sisters, they live in that area, and गैस भी सब एक साथ चला गया, फोन बंद हो गए, बिजली नहीं है 2 दिन तक, which means your fridge is dead and gas भी नहीं है. तो it quickly literally became a situation where people were like, what do we do about food? Now this situation is not the only place, Clifton in defense is not the only place this is happening, but that's where we know people, and if we know people, we know there's other areas where it's much worse. So there was a lot of sorry Rafay.
For years, German Watch has been reporting that Pakistan is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change.
Yeah.
Hello.
So, like we've been saying, it's all happening. Phir kya hua? The story of events, the series of events was, there was a demonstration. और demonstration थी cantonment board के बाहर और DHA के बाहर, and तस्वीरें आने लगी, this brigadier is in charge of it, or is there was, people learned more about defense in the past week than they did in 30. फिर क्या हुआ? There was a series of demands. One thing that I liked that Davar posted was, in the demands was, it was people, now defense people are charged, people are being charged for waste services, encroachment पे फौरन आए थे, so they had a list of demands that they put. The Davar had shared. He found someone else gave it to him. He didn't come up with the criticism, but what he was saying,
वो the news के press release गई है, उसमें publish हुई है वो, the news के ऊपर proper online एक पड़ी भी है वो 22 list demands.
One of my favorite things that he also innocently pointed out was कि ये हर गली नुक्कड़ पे जो beggars वाला scene है ना, ये भी हमें नामंजूर है. तो उन्होंने कहा कि सारे मसले ये flooding के चक्कर में हम अपनी सारी grievances list कर लें. What we were wondering was, इसका flooding से क्या ताल्लुक है, drainage से क्या ताल्लुक है. But I think what we're seeing again is that the infrastructure simply in areas like defense and Clifton perhaps either does not exist, and in several other areas there is just no drainage, or jahan hai wahan it's been encroached upon, built upon, blocked.
Ali ye kahun कि look, 9 inch बारिश का कोई जवाब नहीं.
Yes.
You don't design municipal infrastructure for 9 inch rains. because that's a freak event. You design them on a basis of risk. What's on average for 10, 15 years? 4 inch ki drain laga lo, foot ki drain laga lo. But and this is what Danish Mustafa of King's College has said rightly, that in the age of climate change, and this is the challenge for metropolitan organizations like Karachi Metro, is in the time of climate change there is no such thing as averages. पिछले 10 साल के averages निकाल के क्या करोगे? अगले साल is going to be not happen. It might not happen for 10 years. So the decision on how to invest in this infrastructure on the basis of what risk calculations is making things very difficult.
One of the reasons we keep on discussing Clifton and DHA is this particular year, जो हमारी myth थी ना, that if you have money you can pay for better infrastructure for a little bubble, वो myth bust हो गई है. People know कि हमने pay किया है. Now I was talking to one of the brigadiers who used to be in DHA, and वो मुझे बता रहे थे कि exactly इसी तरह के flood storms आई थी back in 1994. And DHA की development की DHA कराची की was happening since late 80s और आबादी भी आ गई, लेकिन 94 में इतनी ज्यादा बारिश हुई कि citizens निकला protest करने, इस तरह के protest हुए, and then they decided कि we're going to build those ढक जो नालास जो हर गली के अंदर जो डाले हुए हैं, और खोद के उन्होंने कोई 2-2 फुट के बनाए टनल्स और उसके ऊपर पे कंक्रीट की स्लैब्स रख दी. This is what happened. Now वो जो पानी उसके अंदर है वो कहीं जाता नहीं है, वो it tries to go into the sea, but when you have a high tide, especially during a storm, जब sea अंदर की तरफ आ रही है, that all come back into DHA. वही अब उन्हें समझ, अब ये टेक्निकल बात है, अब समझ आ रही है उन्हें, because they paid for it and they are asking कि ये क्या हुआ है, किसने डिजाइन किया, who was the consultant, कितने पैसे लगे. So this myth has been busted and Clifton DHA is rightly pissed off. But when they were buying property, I continue asking people, especially educated people, जिन्होंने अपने 8th class से पढ़ रहे हैं climate change, climate खराब हो रहा है, सैलाब आ रहे हैं, they've seen the 2010 floods, they've seen हर city में flooding. So why don't they simply assess where are they buying the property? And in a lot of these cases, obviously the land mafia is separate, उनका तो issue है ही. Lekin when people particularly buy land in societies that are illegal, जहाँ environmental assessment नहीं हुई हुई, that is also an awareness issue. जो हम गरीबों को कहते हैं कूड़ा क्यों फेंक रहे हैं, अमीरों के अंदर भी awareness issue है. Why don't you simply see कि ये approved है, या drainage नाला जो है उसकी कितनी बड़ी length है, क्या है?
I might remember my nani telling me that Clifton Defense Wala area used to be like underwater, a lot of it, and it's reclaimed.
It's reclaimed land.
Yeah, which is
it's garbage compacted down.
So it just makes sense in a like physics wala way, and geographically, pani will just flow towards the sea.
I was looking at Karachi master plan documents, and this document from 1952, which borrows heavily from these British gazettes of that time. उसके उन्होंने लिखा हुआ है कि जो गिजरी क्रीक है, गिजरी used to be a harbor by the way, वहाँ मलीर के जो एंड गुजरता है ना, वो सारा वहाँ से आखिरी जो लेग है ना मलीर की वहाँ से गुजरती थी. तो गोरों ने कहा कि we'll reclaim the land, but north east of Gizri Creek. उन्होंने कहा साउथ में अभी हम कुछ नहीं कर सकते. सिमिलरली हमने क्लिफ्टन ने कहा क्लिफ्टन का जो साउथ है हम वहाँ करेंगे, साउथ ईस्ट में जहाँ DHA वगैरह वहाँ नहीं. So they came up with the ideas कि यहाँ हमने reclamation करनी है और यहाँ पे नहीं करनी. अब गिजरी के अंदर जब when you reclaim the land, जहाँ DHA phase 6 है, बुखारी है, शहर कमर्शियल है, all these big fancy करोड़ों की प्रॉपर्टी है, ये सारा कुछ समुद्र के अंदर होता था, and they blocked the flow of the Malir river. अभी तो मलीर इतने फ्लड में नहीं आया. In case whenever you have 20 years down the road when Malir floods, this will cross into all of DHA. ये अभी पानी खड़ा हुआ, that's a separate issue. The river will basically inundate the entire commercial areas, and that's a much bigger risk. They'll have to build barriers to the river coming in. So उसके लिए भी कोई नहीं सोच रहा. You have all these people still thinking in terms of कि हमें drains चाहिए, हमें pumps चाहिए. Think about the future कि 20 years के बाद ये पानी क्या करेगा आपके साथ.
Especially when we're expecting the sea level itself to rise.
Yeah, sea level itself to rise.
Yeah.
One of the problems with this DHA, ये गिजरी का जो mention कर रहे हैं आप, it's actually very accurate with the documents, and they show that. Another problem is My Karachi, where they have just completely blocked what was a very natural outfall. And the funny thing is, many years ago, somebody told me जब गिजरी का flyover बन रहा था, which is नीचे थोड़ी सी वो आबादी थी, I was like, why is this happening? And I was told that they look at it through a security lens as well. So the approaches are limited. You have Khaiban Ittihad se aap jaye. You have they had to create the Gizri flyover, which would because the rest of that connection up to Saudi Council used to get choked quite a bit.
Yeah.
So there's that. There's Zamzama, and then there's like maybe by Dolman. So there's only 5 approaches to DHA, 5 exit entry points. And that was not enough for the population that was expanding. So
Yeah.
that's why they built this. One of the reasons why they built this stupid flyover that ends at Punjab Chorangi, and it's just a mess in terms of there's no planning. There's not part of any master plan because the jurisdiction of the CBC ends there, and they are not interested in the master plan department which works with the Sindh Building Control Authority. So pani to bilkul block ho raha hai, and they're on topifying on top of that all these stupid flyovers because they just want to whiz around in their vehicles.
Mahim had earlier said you were talking to Arif Saab about how land has been conquered by cities, and that is the case. But reclamation is very different. You're not conquering the ecosystem, you're sort of making an ecosystem. So far from ignoring the natural ecosystem, a lot of this DHA has been built in complete ignorance of what the ecosystem
in
is.
Defiance. Yeah.
Right? I was very lucky when I would come to Karachi growing up. I had the great fortune of visiting quite often Mr. Adishya Kausji, who'd written about, how these drains were being blocked as early as the 90s and early 2000s.
Glass tower.
Mai Kolachi blocking up the estuaries. And his daughter Ava has continued some litigation. I understand that the EU had a project that was going to revitalize some drain or nala. And the Sindh High Court did a stay on that. And the argument there was just that this urban regeneration project is playing with the natural estuaries of the city. I've had the great fortune of working with these river engineers on a project recently and came back with this one tidbit of knowledge about river engineering that they told me. So the one fundamental thing about river engineering is that you can't engineer a river.
The sad part about all of this is that हम जब कहते हैं ना Clifton डूब गया, DH डूब गया, Kent डूब गया, Kharadar डूब गया. So a lot of this is actually being used as marketing for DH city and Bahria town now because
I was thinking
real estate agents are marketing. अब यहाँ पे आ जाए, आपके पास पैसा, आप तो बचाएं अपने आप.
When you were mentioning the लोग सोचते नहीं है, मेरे दिमाग में यही चल रहा था कि कराची का जो बहरिया टाउन है, that's like slightly to the north of the city, highway की तरफ है.
As in Jamshoro, that's not Karachi.
Can I share another insight that was told to me by the Kausjis, and it has to do with this ludicrous idea of developing these islands in Karachi for
the Bandal and Bhutto Islands, yeah. So it's very interesting.
It had been tried again 15 years ago. There was this crazy German that they brought into town, Thomas Kramer. Yeah, I remember he tried to invest in it as well. Well, here's the good news, that the type of salt or the amount of salt that the Arabian Sea carries into the coast of Karachi or into Karachi is very different in its composition than the type of air and salt that you find in the Gulf cities of Abu Dhabi and Dubai. The salt in Karachi is far more corrosive. And no building. You've got those apartments that were built in Karachi in the late
Sea view.
वो तो खड़े नहीं रहे ना.
Yeah.
तो बनाए इनको. बनाए. 15 साल में गिर जाएंगे.
I'd like to add something of the last point about the marketing that he's mentioned for DHA and all. The problem is that there's also the scary example of Naya Nazimabad. And that is a gated community master plan. And Bahria has also cut into a lot of the rock and the natural terrain here. And he claims it didn't flood, but there was flooding there. So, and DHA जो है वो इतनी गंदी हुई है, इनका मुंह काला हुआ है. And the people who are designing, who master plan DHA, are the people who end up making a massive, epic mess of K4 Usmani. So, I hope people will now question कि अच्छा इसके पीछे लोग कौन हैं जो ये डिजाइन कर रहे हैं, consultants.
That's the thing. वैसे अभी DHA की marketing तो कर देंगे ये, लेकिन DHA में लोग कितने रहते हैं DHA city के अंदर? When you have thousands of people moving in, when they're producing tons of sewage every day, तब वहाँ ये same चीज repeat होगी unless you have the proper municipal system which cleans up, and unless you have landfills outside of Karachi जहाँ सब कुछ जाए, तब तक कुछ नहीं हो सकता. आप DHA cities जितनी मर्जी बना लो, आप बहरिया टाउन जितनी मर्जी बना लो, आप नया नाज़िमाबाद जितनी मर्जी बना लो, can't be resolved unless you have basic services.
Somebody was just telling me that I was speaking to the director of military lands and cantonment, and he told me that these builders, there is a massive project coming up for 8 million square yards, and 13 builders are involved. And this is the same Prime Minister amnesty scheme. The Pardesi builders are into it. And this is, Rafay, what you're mentioning. It's the islands. I'm pretty sure it's the islands.
Well, yeah, you know that there are 20 applications, environmental applications for cement plants pending before the EPA Punjab today.
Wow.
20.
Wow.
And the cement industry is already the most greenhouse gas heavy industry in Pakistan. And not to mention the mining and ecosystem destruction that takes place with the production of, or just the sourcing of the raw materials for cement. And that's 20 more that we're expecting. So, you know, the future trajectory, our path going forward is not climate responsible. There is nothing on the ground anywhere to suggest that we have our act together. Yeah. Karachi is at risk of flooding, and it's also at risk of heat waves. 1,400 people died in a heat wave over the course of a week, not less than a decade ago. And none of them had electricity or air conditioners. And that's the case with Karachi. As temperatures get higher, because climate change is going to impact people on a scale of affluence, not anything else, it's going to be the disproportionate number of people in Karachi who live in informal settlements, don't have access to utilities, who are going to suffer. That's another risk that we're going to see going into metropolitan areas, going into Karachi, into Pakistan. And we're talking about temperature increases, 2-3 degrees from mean. So if we see 45 degrees now, we're talking about 48 degrees in the next 10 or 15 years.
On average. An average means that there will be higher temperatures.
That temperature.
Yeah.
But I think this whole flooding going forward, I'm wondering with the people who live in DHA or Clifton, and they will live in terror, and they will maybe hopefully take an interest, because
they're going to be serious climate refugees. Adawar has the maps of what the flooding in Karachi is going to look like in the future.
Yeah. That's what. And
also, the thing that I'm really curious about is that the one thing that these guys have realized with the DHA CDC thing is that they can buy fancy houses, but what they can't buy is a collective sewage system that is connected to that of the rest of the city and treatment plants. So there has to be out of the bubble thinking, which I'm hoping if we make the journalism available and you guys keep talking, they will think, we have to be part, because that was the whole jurisdictional problem. And it is with Bahria as well. What DHA City and Bahria, and by the way, along the superhighway, there are applications for other high-rises that are coming up. That is not the only housing society that people are trying to build there, because Karachi expansion, we've hit up against the sea. Now we're just expanding up into, Hyderabad, Thatta, these areas, you can't, Bahria goes all the way up.
We'll get to Hyderabad eventually.
I keep on saying that Bahria town is in Jamshoro, it's not Karachi. I keep on saying that because jo Bahria Islamabad hai, wo Pindi mein hai. Usi tarah Bahria Karachi is in Jamshoro, and they're continuously expanding. I was reading, I think, some documents that a lot of the Bahria town development, especially Sports City and all of these, which are still on paper, actually come under Sevan Development Authority, which basically develops Jamshoro and all these areas as well. So it's
Karachi is not the location, wo bas branding hai. It's for marketing.
And these are going to be more jurisdictional issues.
He's in also Khairpur. There's a Bahria Nawab Shah and Bahria Khairpur.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about Dawar. You're talking to this person who used to be in the DHA board himself. Internally, did you get any indication of how they feel about the future and the lack of sufficiency of what the infrastructure currently is? So
one of the things I don't think this is a DHA alone issue. Kent, DHAs, all these societies, they are pitched these ideas by fancy consultants, and sometimes these consultants aren't even Pakistanis. They come from a place far abroad. Europe mein baithe honge, it will be climate haven for them. वो यहाँ आते हैं, उन्हें ideas देते हैं कि हम ये कर देंगे, आपके लिए ये कर देंगे. And simply speaking, Pakistanis, we are a low middle income country. हमें ideas से हम impress हो जाते हैं. And when these ideas finally start getting executed, we think that we're doing something revolutionary. ठीक है? So in that sense, एक तो वो approve हो जाता है. दूसरा ये है कि in a lot of these cases, जब cooperative housing societies होती हैं, you have AGMs every year, and you have residents who can then come up and protest at the AGM and tell the management कि ये हम होने नहीं देंगे. Now there are certain societies, private housing societies, जहाँ इतना closed off वो discussions होती है. You don't have public hearings, you don't have AGMs. People cannot even talk about these things to with the management. So वहाँ पे a lot of these things get approved without any oversight. So DHA में भी यही हुआ है कि people, obviously employees don't discuss these things. The top level, top tier जो executives हैं वो they approve all of these and they get implemented. कोई objection आनी थी that comes from DHA residents, and that's why I keep coming back कि DHA residents now कोई demand सब कुछ छोड़ दें. DHA residents have to think in terms of local representation and the residents having an oversight body of everything. Literally everything. You cannot even approve small electricity gas connections without the residents oversight, because when you continue developing towards a bundle island, आप गैस कनेक्शन, बिजली कनेक्शन दोगे, जो पीछे रहने वाले सीवरेज कनेक्शन जब आगे दे दोगे तो पीछे रहने वाले उन पे भी इफेक्ट आता है. सो ईच ऑफ दीज थिंग्स हैव टू बी स्टडीड एंड उनकी स्क्रूटनी होनी चाहिए. अदरवाइज again these same mistakes will be repeated, and in some cases especially हम ये fancy housing societies की बात करते हैं, इनका short term goal होता है. The builders have to build, pack up the land into canals, sell off and go home, enjoy their takeaway जो money उनको मिल गया. And वही money they'll invest somewhere else, उससे और ज़्यादा double करते जाएंगे. So it basically it's a pyramid scheme in all sense of the things. वो बार बार चेन पैसे बढ़ाते जाते हैं अपने, उनका तो सुकून हो गया. But at the same time जिन लोगों ने रहना है, these questions are for them.
Just so we talk about where things are going and the flooding thing that was mentioned, over the next 30 years, there's an expectation of 2 to 7 feet rise in sea levels. There's a whole map that hopefully I will have put up in this edit and you guys can see this, which really shows a significant portion of defense, which is, this is phase 6. Haji Bukhari commercial सब जो अभी डूबा हुआ था, Sultanabad, Al Azhar, and you know, it's all, I'm assuming
वहाँ plot नहीं लेना चाहिए.
इधर आप plot ना लीजिएगा.
This basically takes into account the same thing. Topographical mapping जब आप करते हो तो उसका elevation is the key factor in all of this. And this right now is based on sea level rise. This isn't considering urban flooding kitni extreme होगी, because when you talk about climate projections, उसके अंदर we cannot project because of the feedback cycle जो शुरू हो गई है. When something gets worse, it heats up some other part of the world. For example, यहाँ पे गर्मी इतनी ज़्यादा पड़ रही है कि you have aerosols driving all the way to the Arctic. आर्कटिक गर्म हो रहा है, वहां बर्फ पिघलेगी, वहां से और ज्यादा एरोसोल्स, मीथेन निकलेगी, उससे और ज्यादा क्लाइमेट चेंज होगा. So we cannot even project properly क्या सीन होगा. So we cannot say कि precipitation इतनी बढ़ जाएगी. We are only assuming कि हर साल on average you can consider कि each spell is going to be extended by 10-20 millimeters each. That's the best we can do right now. When you consider all of that in this, so I don't see कि ये बचेगा क्या इस जगह का, unless you're building huge 9 foot 10 feet walls around the sea. अगर आप वो दीवारें बना देते हो और अर्बन फ्लडिंग हो जाती है तो पानी भी बाहर कैसे जाएगा? आप अंदर आने से समुद्र को रोक लेते हो, बाहर कैसे जाएगा फिर? So it's a whole mess. और यहाँ पे I assume कि there are a lot of educated people in DHA who starts talking about these things, not in their circles but with CBC, with DHA, कि आपका future plan क्या है? Do you have a sustainability report of this project? अब आपने एक graveyard बना दिया है right at the edge of the Arabian Sea. Phase 8 का graveyard Arabian Sea के ऊपर है. वहाँ जो टावर, कोरल टावर बन रहा है, उनका व्यू या समुद्र का या कब्रिस्तान का. So you talk about these things. You ask कि आपने क्या सोच के बनाया है. When you think कि ये actual लोग plan कर रहे हैं, actual investment हो गया इस चीज की, you have to ask कि किसने सोच के किया. अब we had this real estate bubble till the mid 2000s, and again a similar bubble is going to be created because of the construction packages and everything. So a lot of people are going to be misguided, and at the same time residents जो already misguided हो चुके हैं, they have the opportunity to warn others, they have the opportunity to start scrutinizing all of these things, and climate scenarios will have to become a huge part in all of these things. And I think Karachi से बड़ी example अब हो नहीं सकती. Sindh बाकी भी flood हुआ है, you have KP where as well, but at least people who were ignorant of all of these things have been made aware by a
Yeah,
sudden jerk
yeah,
to their consciousness, and वो जो myth bust हुई है,
yeah.
that is something that we need to build upon in terms of awareness as well.
बट हमारे बहुत सारे मसलों की हल जो है ना, देयर इज गुड न्यूज़, देयर इज अ सोल्यूशन दैट हैज़ बीन प्रेजेंटेड, एंड आपकी सारी जो कंसर्न्स हैं दे विल बी रिजॉल्व्ड बाय द हिस्टोरिक 11 ट्रिलियन रुपी पैकेज दैट हैज़ बीन अनाउंस्ड.
Oh,
ये मैं डॉन को
11
पढ़,
trillion.
no sorry,
Holy
it's
shit.
1.1, sorry, 1.1 trillion. उसमें
Us.
सारे मसले हल हो जाएंगे. The effort, this is the K4 scheme that has been mentioned already. इसमें permanently कराची के सारे water problems will be solved in 3 years. जिसमें एक तो water supply का problem हल होगा. NDMA is already working on the encroachments on
See, Mahim,
सारी बातें.
I have a cow's story to tell.
ये वो मोमेंट है, अभी कमेंट आना है कि भाई बस remittances, no comments.
हाँ.
अभी वो आने वाला है guys.
सिटी का sewer system, solid waste disposal वो भी हल हो रहा है. अच्छा, ट्रांसपोर्ट का भी प्रॉब्लम है. KCR भी कंप्लीट हो जाएगा, फिर BRT भी बन जाएगी. तो I guess we fixed it. We're done. 3 साल इंतजार
We
कर
fixed Karachi. We fixed Karachi.
रहे हैं.
So, I seeing Mahim's face, I've got this Kausji story.
Yeah.
Back in the 70s, Kausji claims he never knew why, but somehow or the other he pissed off Bhutto. Because they were family, they were friends. Their wives knew each other, they were social friends, they lived in Karachi. Bhutto was the Kausji family lawyer when he came back from Berkeley and so on and so forth. So famously, before the ships were acquired, or the Kausji family ships were acquired, there were tax notices that were sent out. And when Desha got his first tax notice, he went to his father, old man Kausji, who charpai pe Gujarati aadmi so raha tha, and woke him up and gave him the tax notice. And the old man apparently rolled around. Mahim, I was looking at your expression. He had a look at this tax notice, folded it back, and in his Gujarati accent said, this tarah bahut dekha hai, and went back to sleep.
I love it. I love it.
So
This tarah ka bahut dekha hai, yaar. 1.5 trillion rupees is nothing. Lahore mein jo Ravi Front Development Project ka wo bada si marketing kare, that's a 5 trillion rupee project. 1.5 trillion is nothing, yaar. Karachi is twice the size of Lahore. You guys should be pissed off if the Prime Minister is throwing you crumbs.
shit.
Yeah, actually, I just got some fresh numbers out of that, and apparently they're giving us very little, and the rest has to be the Sindh government from its ADP, and China's giving us a loan for the KCR or
Okay,
whatever.
China.
And there's a psychological impact with all of this climate change. It's making Karachi crazy, and it was already a
Yeah.
place that made you crazy. It's a depressing city to be in, and I love this city, but I say that the contractors, they skimp on. We've seen a lot of building collapses.
Yes.
We have seen our roads caving in. You would have seen on Twitter those spectacular pictures of these almost like sinkholes that have developed. And another intern, he is an engineer. He went and he wrote a very simple piece. I was like, how is a good road made? And the problem that is surfacing is that when these contractors have to do the soil compaction for the roads, the subgrade and this base and that base, so wahan pe jo hai, they're skimping. And the inspection, and coming back to Karachi being governed, it's an ungovernable city because you can't have that many building inspectors and road inspectors and khanche hote and all of that. So our roads are caving in. And I think now when I drive, I used to be terrified in Karachi of someone holding a gun to my head. Now, as I drive home or get around the city, I have this thing. I have PTSD that I think there's probably a nala under this road, and it probably wasn't built properly, and it is going to cave in. And my yeah, मैं तो अंदर बस धंस जाऊंगी because this has happened in these rains. This has happened.
Yep.
So not only are you making a mess of the ecology or your environment, but the built environment is so badly constructed. And another thing that happened is that the supermarkets, they've been, I got 5 years of data of the supermarkets that have been catching fire. So what they're building is also death traps. So an
Supermarkets
scale,
catching fire.
Yeah, like Agha's just burned down like 1 or 2 months ago. And if anyone has shopped at Agha's or any of the major stores, even Imtiaz, these major chains, these franchises, in Karachi, architects tell me that if you look at the plotting of the land, there is no space that is big enough for you to properly build a hypermarket or a supermarket. And
Yeah.
the land nahi hai zameen, and the way they build these plots and the zoning that they do, it's messed up. So the way they build these supermarkets where women and children go every day, I'm very
Yeah.
nervous going there. So
Yeah.
It's a
in
shame the
terms of,
supermarkets don't make any money and so can't invest in better infrastructure for
Yeah.
themselves.
oh, that's very true. Yeah. So
Tragic demise of Mr. Aha as well last week. He was a
yes, right,
feature of the
right.
city.
A few questions, I think, as we get to the end of our. We've exceeded our initial time limit. Dawar, thank you very much for hanging around. We have a few questions that some we might have answered, some I don't know if we can answer here. But one of the questions that we got was a great one. Is it even possible to fix natural drainage in Karachi?
So this is
Anything
a,
is possible. A Boeing
yeah, but
747 taking off is the most unnatural thing in the world. But we have no problem flying to London for shopping. Anything is
We.
possible. The political economy, if यार देखो यहाँ जब पेशावर का इंसिडेंट हुआ था 2 महीनों के अंदर अंदर पाकिस्तान के सारे स्कूल्स में 12 फुट की दीवार थी.
So,
yes, but Rafay, allow me this. The problem is with the untrammeled growth is that in Nalope and the drainage, this person who's asked this question, it is all these poor people who live there. So what we've seen is the Supreme Court has been saying कि हटाओ in encroachments go.
yeah,
And then there's a lot of cruelty that happens when these
encroachment is a
poor
very
people
um,
There is no
are
such
being
thing as an
encroached.
encroachment. We have
Yeah, yeah.
illegal settlements, and the housing policy says you can't disrupt illegal settlements unless you have rehabilitation and
yeah.
alternative places to provide people. The
Informal,
state and the
yeah.
Supreme Court cannot go beyond the fundamental rights of people and violate them. So using urban cleanliness drives as a means of this dispossession is brutal in the extreme and
Yeah.
terribly unfair.
It's a very sanitary word, which basically means we're going to cause a lot of homelessness.
And it's always the poor and unfortunate people who are forced to live there because the elites have displaced them because of their housing schemes acquiring the land that people used to live on. When I used to go to Karachi, Karachi was a city of apartments. Then someone figured out how to reclaim land. You know, had this conquering of nature or this ashraful mukhlukat, whatever comes into our hand is our bounty to exploit, not been the driving or one of the driving forces behind this, you'd have small apartments.
Yeah.
Very
मगर उनमें
expensive
cricket
small
कैसे
apartments,
खेलेंगे?
but small apartments. I would look at it this differently. I'd look at them as the sort of in kind of like climate culprits that, you know, there are a handful of oil companies that have made money knowing what's going wrong for the last 150 years.
Yeah.
So a fraction of the city's population has spent incredible amounts of money to benefit themselves, really, because no revenue has gone to the CBC or to the Karachi Metropolitan, to benefit themselves and to display their wealth. Yeah.
So to answer that question,
the oil company thing, by the way, हम DHA का बहुत ज़्यादा discuss कर चुके हैं. Now from Kemari to Kurangi, 1960s 70s में oil pipelines ले हुई थी कि केमाड़ी के ऊपर crude oil आता है, वो refine होके diesel जाना है कुरंगी. So underneath Bukhari and all these fancy commercial areas, now you have oil pipelines, and no one talks about this huge hazard. If something happens, God
we
forbid.
just had a fire the other day.
केमाड़ी पे आग लगी
Yeah,
है ना
that
अभी?
was in Kemari, and now
Yeah.
you have oil pipelines which go all the way to Kurangi, जहाँ PRL or LNK
Plot
refinery.
of a Die Hard movie.
Yeah.
You know, where the city is going to...
Yeah.
This happened in Game of Thrones. They blew up the whole city by
That's right.
lighting it up.
Yeah, just look at Beirut 1 month ago.
Yeah.
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 No one thinks about these things. Why are those pipelines still active while residents are living above them?
I just want to add one thing to the question about whether you should clear the stormwater drains. You should clear them. Naale saaf hone chahiye. Acha, it is connected to how the poor and the kachi abadis and all these people live. So what also needs to happen is pro-poor housing. And you have to, there's a lot of state land that is available जहाँ पर आप लोगों के लिए housing बना सकते हैं. खुदा की बस्ती तस्नीम सिद्दीकी's done incremental housing. So you can do these things, but you have to have some kind of a plan where you have other stuff working in tandem. And the problem with Karachi is that if the Kachi Abadi comes up, it is because the people need to live close to the city center where their workplace is.
Yes.
Ayub came and he dumped them all on the outskirts of the city, but they could not, like Schemes 33, Teza Town, people can't find transport into the city where they need to work. So Gharib Admi spends all of their money on अच्छा buses भी नहीं चलती हैं. So
Yeah.
you need mass transit so people can reach their work, and then they'll be happy to live further away where land is cheaper and they
Public
can
transport is another obvious and relevant point that perhaps we don't have time for this discussion to get into it, but uh, someone is asking, how does one actively engage in local politics and community activism? This is not directly relevant to our discussion, but it is relevant in the sense that people now want to be informed and thus involved. I don't know how would one, if you're in Karachi, depending on where you're living, how do you get
Mm.
involved in your local decision
So
making?
first of all, they need to read Sama Digital, where we put up a lot of journalism.
No,
But
we're
they
not
need
talking
Valid plug. Valid plug.
okay. Well, if they just read and stay up to date with अखबार में जो tender आते हैं and जो environmental hearings हो रही हैं, and they should turn up there.
Yeah.
They should go to their UC daftar. They should understand the system and the people who are responsible and kurchofy, and then use Twitter because everybody is very sensitive now on Twitter. So young people, I tell them, make a fuss.
Yeah.
So and ask people like Rafay or Dawar or me questions, and we will find you the answers as well.
Yeah.
And show up to those hearings. Read about the court stuff that's happening.
Yeah.
And if you know more, then you'll find a way to make a stink and prevent things from happening.
It takes effort, and you can't. As what I was thinking of ये DHA CBC वाले में कि चलो अभी protest हो रही हैं, demands आई हुई हैं, ये वो है, हफ्ता 10 दिन लगाएंगे वो, they'll drain the water and then it's not going to rain अगले साल तक, and people are going to be back to normal, you know, चाय का ढाबा and going to parties, and बस ठीक है, अगले साल अगर हुई बारिश तो देखेंगे, and nothing needs to happen because people forget, I guess.
Since late 2018, when Greta Thunberg sort of started taking the lead on the international climate movement, I was struck by the fact that I think it was just before the COP meeting in 2018, which was about November or so, there were 35,000 students in Belgium that took off a Friday and went and protested outside their park. 35,000 students!
Yeah.
Pakistan is the most vulnerable country to climate change. So somehow the message isn't coming through here.
This is what stuns me, Rafay, because I just did a video with Arif Hassan, and all he said, it was a video. He said, Karachi mein 64 nalas hai, and this is how the water comes down and it goes into a nala. And people are like, oh, wow, 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 wow. And I was like, what? Did you guys not know?
Know this?
People are
well,
so
you know,
clueless.
we do have esoteric interests, Mahim. The sewage and the public
No,
transport.
I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry. The journalism is out there, and I'm not the only one who's done it. You've been writing. Everyone's been writing. There's video, everything. Come on, these kids just don't give a shit.
That's I think the lesson that people don't care enough. जब तक literally पानी सर से ना गुजर जाए ना, as we've seen. What do other cities in Pakistan need to look out for?
Quetta is subsiding, sinking, and its walls are cracking because उनका कारेज का system होता था, which was a natural, wonderful way of farming, and they did away with that. And now people in Quetta move through their neighborhoods to go to the neighborhoods where tanker ka rate cheap hai. And Karachi is a spectacular city where we drive our water around, you know. I mean, we like to drive our water around the city.
What's brutal, Mahim, is that although people in Quetta don't have drinking water, Balochistan still produces fantastic fruits and dry fruits which it exports for dollars. Using tube wells, the electricity of which is subsidized by the federal government. And it's the use of those tube wells that has unsustainably driven water tables down, destroying the old Kares system of community water maintenance.
I did not know that. That is really good to know. So the next problem in Karachi is also boring. So we don't have a lot of intercity discussion. I happen to know Rafay, so I learned a lot about Lahore, you know, etc., etc. But I mean, I don't know anyone from Quetta who's writing or talking about the urban planning as well. And the smaller towns that are coming up and becoming more urbanized because unpe bahut pressure pad raha hai. Sakhar is in bad shape. You know, Pannu Akil, the cantonment, they're selling the land and high rises are going up there.
Yeah, so the answer really is to, you know, stay informed and get involved. There's no way around it, really. And
you know, if I can just caution, because this is a mistake I made. Coming from a privileged background where you're very lucky that I have a fan and an electricity and a wall that protects me from the outside elements. perhaps the most important thing I've learned is that you have to listen. Right? It's not about I can read 5 articles and be the smartest person in the room. But that's not really the case. I'm not the smartest person. I've just read 5 articles.
I was reading your demands, by the way, DH. There was a very interesting demand. People wanted the water to be removed in 3 days' time, and they wanted the electricity to be reduced in 24 hours. And electric said कि पानी जब तक remove नहीं होगा तब तक बिजली नहीं आएगी. So even in a week long situation, you have to plan. Demands आप कैसे दे रहे हो?
Yeah.
So
when they were protesting, they said Ahmed Chinoy bahar niklo. He has nothing to do with DHA and CBC. They didn't know who the elected representative was, and they didn't know who the new CEO of the Clifton Cantonment Board was. They didn't know who was in the building.
Yeah. So get informed before you get involved. I think to close, we just have some accusations that Rafay has to deal with. He's conveniently turned his video off at just as we came to this point. Rafay, video. I don't know what's Hanji. So recently there was some disturbing commentary coming from your account, which seemed to be saying that planting trees is a bad idea, and then obviously logon ko aag lag gayi because people.
I retweeted a tweet by someone called Benjamin C.
Yes, who has
he is an English teacher
delightful
who has been
Twitter
doing
account.
Climate activism.
Yeah,
and Ben is quite right to suggest, quite rightly, that the science, the IPCC verified science is that with temperature increase that we're seeing, there is no ecosystem on Earth that's safe and has the evolutionary capacity to be able to withstand such a temperature increase in such a short period of time.
Yeah.
And so we're going to see large die-offs. We've already entered the 6th extinction event. So these are die-offs we're seeing in other species, but we'll start seeing them in flora and fauna very, very soon. And I had raised this concern because a lot of Pakistani climate awareness or policy has morphed into the PTI government's fantastic 10 billion tree tsunami project, which is an afforestation project that's meant to capture the carbon that's been released into the atmosphere. But this effort and the other efforts of the Pakistani government, this government, in trying to deal with climate change, present a picture that climate change is something that isn't Pakistan's problem. It's been caused by other countries.
This is widespread.
Pakistan is not a big greenhouse gas emitter. Therefore, हमें कुछ करने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. और देखो यार, हम दरख्त तो लगा रहे हैं, तो तुम किस चीज़ की बात कर रहे हो?
Yeah.
But the point is, the day I tweeted this, there was flooding in Chakwal and in Swat and in Bahrain and Badin and in Karachi. And there'd been a plague of locusts and a national emergency. And you see Glof's videos being taken by tourists. None of the policy that the government has addresses these issues. And whilst the 10 billion tree tsunami is fantastic, whilst the STP, the Sustainable Development Goal Achievement pat on the back that we got is laudable, these aren't the impacts. We're being misled from the impacts of climate change, and we're being told a story that it isn't our problem, it's other people's problems.
Yeah.
The thing is that we have to stop looking at climate change in terms of countries. It's not that India polluted this much and Italy polluted that much. This is not how climate change works. It works, as I said, on a scale of affluence. It affects you it affects you more if you're poor than if you're rich. And we are, by and large, poor people in a poor country. All right? So saying it's another person's problem is lying about the fact that millions of people in Pakistan are going to be affected by climate change.
Yeah, we might not be causing it.
Is not enough.
We might not be causing it as much as others, but we're definitely going to be affected beyond our fair share.
I can talk about this all day. With CPEC and the huge amount of coal-fired power plants we've put up in the last 4 years and what we plan to put up in the next 5 or 10, we're going to go from 400 million metric tons of carbon to 1,600 million metric tons of carbon by 2030, which is the Paris Agreement limit. That's when Paris Agreement targets are supposed to be set. And whilst at 400 million metric tons, we may be 130 on the list of countries that produce greenhouse gases. But at 1,600 million metric tons will be where Japan is today at number 9. And that's not a future we want, because our country is also the trustee of the Hindu Kush, Himalayan, Karakoram mountain ranges and the glaciers and the people and their history there.
Yeah.
And at 3 degrees of temperature rise, with the highway we plan to build through this most sensitive ecosystem of the world and the diesel trucks we plan to run on it to China, we're going to destroy this completely. And that's known as ecocide. And I'm cautioning people against the ecocide that we're committing. And let's not be fooled by the rosy picture we're being painted by a bunch of politicians.
ठीक है जी. Thank you very much for coming, Rafay, Davar, Mahim. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's
very
been
much.
depressing as always, but that's just the way things are. We're going to end it now. I'll put their Twitter accounts below, links to what they've been saying below. Thank you for watching. I'm at the Mohalla Rizwan Sarkhail, TPR Pod group account. Stay informed, get involved. There's still hope. I don't know. But we have to try. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.